My name's Matt Billard, and welcome to my lightning talk today, creating a proxy with Node and Express. So imagine the following use case. You need to develop some code, and you need to give it to another team, but you don't have access to run their site locally and test your code. There could be a variety of reasons for this. Maybe it's very complex to set up. Maybe it's a bunch of Java microservices or lots of databases, or there's a lot of permissions or access that needs to be granted, or maybe just the other team doesn't want to take the time to set it up with you. And so imagine if you could, a better solution where you could combine your code and theirs, develop, test, and iterate, and then you can give them the final product knowing full well that it's going to work perfectly. So what sort of real life scenarios might you find yourself in where this is the case? In fact, I was watching a YouTube video recently where somebody was in this situation. They were working for some sort of CRM, maybe Salesforce.com, and they had to create a standalone widget. Let's say it was a form, and they had to develop it outside of that environment and put it in that environment and guarantee it was going to work. Or I was in this situation about 2 years ago at a client site. There was one group that had a website, and our group was asked to iframe it. But as you know, iframes are a little bit odd. And one of the odd things about iframes is if it's really easy for the user to leave that iframe. So if they, for instance, right-click on a link and hit open in new window, they're going to leave the iframe and go to the actual site. And we didn't want that to happen. So I was tasked with writing some code that would modify all the links on the page. So even if they did that right click and open a new window, it would keep them in the iframe. So, and of course I couldn't run the other site because it was very complex and time consuming and lots of permissions. So it was a very difficult scenario. And if only I'd had this project, it would have made it much easier. So it sounds like what we need is to create a proxy to inject our code into somebody else's site. Here's a good diagram of how it's going to work. So we have our browser, usually Chrome, making a request to a Node proxy server that I'm going to show you in a minute. And it's going to ask website 1 and 2 for information. So let's follow a few potential paths here. The first one is you ask website 1 for its HTML page. What it's going to do is it's going to ask website 1, and then it's going to ask website 2 for the content, and the proxy is going to combine them and send them to the browser. Now there will be additional assets that need to be loaded, like JavaScript or CSS. So what's going to happen is your browser will request it from the proxy. It will ask website 1. If it has it, it's going to return it. If it does not, it's going to ask website 2 for it, and it's going to return it. So remember these 3 paths, because they're going to become important when we look at the code. So the first one is the HTML, that it's going to combine the 2. The second one is it's going to return an asset, some JavaScript or CSS from website 1, or if it's not found, it's going to ask website 2 and return it from there. And now it's time for a demo. So for our demo, we're going to make website 1 be the inrhythm.com website, and the second one is going to be a create React app. It's going to be a basic create React app, not modified in any way. And we're going to combine the 2. So let's take a look at this. So here you can see the inrhythm.com website, just as it is. The second one is create React app, no modifications whatsoever, running on port 3000. And now you can see on my local host 8000, we have the inrhythm.com website and create React app running together in the same browser window. This is pretty cool. And if what's even better is if we navigate around, you can see we're navigating to different pages. It's still working. It's combining the 2 no matter where we go. Let's take a look at the source code. Here you can see the inrhythm.com HTML. There's quite a lot of it. And way at the bottom, after the end of their code, we're going to inject some stuff ourselves. And pay attention to this. So we're going to inject some CSS and also the HTML of our site right before their closing body tag. Let's take a look at how this is done. So I'm going to switch the screen share to VS Code, and you should be able to see that now. All right, so I have 2 projects in here, Create React App and the Node Express proxy, which is of interest to us. It's pretty standard Node Express project. We have a public folder, routes, views, and the server.js. A lot of this should be familiar to you if you've done any Node or Express development. So we have like a new Express. We're going to have some configuration. We're going to set up some routes. We're going to create a server. We're going to listen on a port. Once we're listening, we're going to output something in the console saying it's working. That's all very standard. That's not the bit that interests us. What does interest us, though, is how the proxy route works. So let's dive into that. So any requests are going to be handled by this one route. I'm just going to make a note here that we're going to be using the very popular NPM package request. That's going to be very important for us. That's very common, and it's going to be crucial for how we make the solution. So remember our flow. First, we're going to request the HTML from website 1. And let's take a look at what this request method is doing. Now, as I go, I'm going to highlight some gotchas that tripped me up and took quite a while to solve. So if I point these out to you, it's going to make your life much easier whether you're working with this proxy or you're developing a new one. One of the first things I found is that websites often compress their content. Now, normally this is an excellent thing. It means that there's less data transfer, the responses are faster. This is normally great, except in our scenario. It's going to be really hard to combine the two HTML if we're trying to like parse gibberish. So what we're going to do is we're kindly going to request that they do not gzip the code. The second thing we're going to do is delete the host header. All these requests through Express are going to look like they came from localhost, which is going to be very strange to the server, and it might respond oddly. We don't want them to do that. We're going to pretend that everything is coming from Chrome, and so we're going to delete that header. Now we're going to make the request. We're going to listen to responses. Let's see how that's handled. And we're going to handle our response based on what type of content is returned. If it's not HTML, it's pretty simple. We just pass it to the callback. If it is HTML, we're going to have to listen for responses from the response. We're going to have to collect all of them. And in the end, we're going to concatenate our buffer and turn it into a string, because that way we can manipulate the HTML. And we're going to call our callback. So that's the request method. That's pretty simple. We're going to go back up to where we were. So we've requested from website 1. And at this point, we have, again, the 3 scenarios that I pointed out before. We're going to check the status code. It can either not be found, or it can be found. If it's found, it can either not be HTML, or it's going to be HTML. I highlighted those earlier when we were looking at the diagram. Let's take a look at the happy path of if it's HTML. So now that we've got website 1's HTML, we're going to request website 2 give us its HTML. And when we get that response, we're going to combine them. So we're going to inject the HTML of website 2 into website 1. Let's take a look at that method. Now, most of you should know that HTML can only have one doc type, one HTML tag, one head tag, and one body tag. And so what we're going to do is we're going to modify website 2's HTML, and we're going to remove those. So now we have the modified HTML2. Now we're going to take website 1's HTML, and we're going to inject website 2's HTML right before the closing body tag. And this should remind you of the source code that we looked at earlier. We're also going to inject some styles. Here was another gotcha that I had to figure out. We have to get rid of the background of website 2, otherwise it's going to cover up website 1. And the other thing we have to do is modify the way that links work. We want, if you click, we're going to have to pass the event through to website 1. We don't want website 2 to block it, so we're going to use some CSS for that. And the other gotcha we're going to do is a lot of websites, when there's a link, it's a full link. It's a full URL. It's like inrhythm.com/something. But we don't want that, because if they click on it, they're going to leave localhost and go to inrhythm.com. So we are going to strip off the something.com and keep just the /something. Now that we have the 2 HTML files combined, we're going to go back up to our method here. Remember, we've asked website 1 for its HTML, website 2, we've combined the two. We have just one more step before we send the response. We're going to change the headers of the response. We've modified the content quite a bit, and so the header called content length is no longer accurate. We want to make sure to remove that. If we don't, Chrome is going to truncate our response, and all that work we're going to do is going to be for nothing. So we're going to make sure to remove that header before we send the response. Here we are. We've asked website 1 for the HTML. We've asked website 2. We've combined them. We've modified the header. We're going to send the response. So that's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is much simpler. If it's not HTML, we can just send the response. If it's not found, remember that's our last condition, what we do is we ask website 2 for the JavaScript or the CSS or the resource and send it to the browser. There's one optimization we can make though. Instead of asking website 1 over and over and over again for stuff that we know is not going to be found, we can remember that, and that way when we have a request come in and we know it's not going to be found, we'll just not ask website 1. We'll just ask website 2 and send the response. And that's about it. So let's go back to the browser and tie that all together. Here we go. Looking again at the source code, remember, here's the end of their content here. And before the closing body tag, we have injected the styles that I showed you and a modified version of website 2's HTML. And that gives us our solution. Now you can see here, we're loading Create React App and website 1 in rhythm.com in one DOM window, which is pretty cool. And you could do a lot of different awesome things with this. Now, if you're interested in trying this out, fortunately for you, it's there for free on my GitHub. You can go to that link right there. Don't forget, when you download it, you're going to need to run both the Node Express proxy and also the Create React app. The instructions are in the README, so it should be quite simple.